Hi, how's it going? We like to ask that question a lot, don't we? We hear people checking in all the time. How you doing? How's it going? What's happening? I was at a meeting the other morning, and I have to preface this by saying it was a very early meeting. And I was sitting off to the side and just listening to people talk as they came in the room. And I heard somebody say, how's it going? And the response was, well, it's been a morning. Not it's been a good morning or a bad morning. It's just been a morning. I've noticed that about some people too, that they'll show up somewhere and they'll just say, morning. They leave off the good at the beginning, almost as if they're waiting to see, not quite sure how this day is going to be. And in fairness, there are some people that as soon as they open their eyes in the morning, they are already beginning to feel overwhelmed. They're thinking through all these to-do lists, and there's problems to be solved, and how am I going to juggle this and that and all these different things. And I realize the pressure is building up for them. You know, there's a cliche that we have that says, when it rains, it pours. And for some people, I think it seems to be pouring in their life all the time, maybe even for you. And so I hope that today's message will help bring you some relief for that. We're continuing in our series called Is That in the Bible, where we're just pulling out phrases that people commonly throw around, and we're asking, is that one really from the Bible? It sounds biblical, but is it really in the Bible? And today's phrase is this: God will never give you more than you can handle. Is that in the Bible? Well, kinda. It's sort of there. I think that a lot of people base it on this one verse from 1 Corinthians. Let's look at the verse. It says this: no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. And so they take that phrase, God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, to say God's not going to give you more than you can handle, more than you can bear. So let me tell you why I say kinda to that phrase. It's sort of when I say God won't give you more than you can handle, and this verse says God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. It sort of sounds like we're saying the same thing, but let's make sure that we really are. Let's really understand this. So as you will hear me say frequently, context is king. So let's get the context of this. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So I want to go back to the beginning of that chapter. And Paul says this: for I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. He's talking about the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. Not only did they pass through the sea, they went through the Red Sea, but it says that they were under a cloud, not a dark storm cloud like you see some people when they're moping around, kind of as it's depicted in cartoons, but literally the cloud of God's presence. When they were in the desert, the cloud of God went over them, and at night it became the flame of God, the fire of God, to keep them warm. And so literally, they had this visual reminder right there above them that God was present with them. But it wasn't just that, because then he goes on to say they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea, and then they all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. They all ate manna that God provided every day, and God also provided water for them in miraculous ways. And now Paul is making the connection here. He says, just like with us, that Jesus is our constant supply and constantly present in our lives, that was the same thing that those Israelites were experiencing in the wilderness, except for where you and I don't look up and see a cloud or fire over us, and we're not going out of our houses in the morning to gather manna up from off the lawn. We still have that assurance that God's presence is with us. But then listen to the very next verse. He says, nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Why? Well, he says their bodies were scattered over the desert. They were dying in the desert. They were dying because of their sin. He goes on to say, now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. What sort of evil things? He describes, do not be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord as some of them did and were killed by snakes, and do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. And again, now he repeats the same thing. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So these are examples for us to look at, but when we look at those examples, we are to take a warning from that. What is the warning? The next verse, verse 12, as I'm reading it out of the New International Version, it's the word so, but it could also be the word therefore. Some Bibles translate it that way because it is kind of the conclusion of this thing. They're written down as examples and warnings. So, or therefore, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. So here's the warning. If those people became overconfident, They said, hey, look, God's presence is right here. We can look up and see the clouds, see the fire. We're eating the manna every day. We know that his presence is right here. And so, we can kind of do what we want to do because God's right here. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to leave us. We're going to be fine. And they became very confident in themselves. And so Paul says, so here's the same warning that we need to take from this. Be careful if you think you're standing firm. If you think you've got everything figured out, if you think that you have your life together, guess what? There's going to be some things that are going to come along that are going to remind you that you don't hold your world together. So then we come back to this verse. Now, let me put it back up on the screen again so that you can see this verse we looked at before. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. So it means everybody experiences sort of the same thing. We all go through this. Notice that word temptation. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Now, what do we mean by temptation here? Let's go to James, the book of James. He does a good job of defining for us what temptation is. In chapter 1, James says this, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one of us is tempted when by his own evil desires he is dragged away and enticed. So what Paul said here about the Israelites back in 1 Corinthians 12 and what James is saying is the exact same thing, that when the desires of our hearts meet an opportunity to act on those things and we don't restrain ourselves, then we are giving in to those temptations. And so Paul's warning is for us, be careful when you think that you're standing firm. Now, we said that this whole idea is God's not going to give me more than I can handle. When the pressure's on, you realize how often we want to find a quick relief for that pressure. And you may not be aware of it, but we're tempted during that time. Now, the temptation might not be these big obvious things. Like he said here, they sat down and they had these pagan revelries. And that's what caused many of them to fall because of their sin there. And you might say, hey, listen, I'm not tempted to look at pornography. I'm not tempted to drink too much. I'm not tempted to use drugs. Now, those are all things that can help us escape from the pressure when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we have things pouring down in our life. But, there's also some subtle temptations too, like maybe to cut the corners or maybe to not quite tell the whole truth. It's not quite a white lie. I didn't lie to them, but I just didn't tell them the whole truth. Maybe to justify taking something for myself that's not really mine. I've been working so hard. This is owed to me. This is what I should get, even though it's not mine. But I should get it because I'm. See, these are subtle temptations, but they're all ways for us to give in to the pressure, to try to relieve the pressure. We're tempted to do that. Maybe there's a relationship that we should take some time to restore what was going on. They said something to me, but I just don't have time to forgive them. I don't have time to let that go. And so we're holding on to the grudge, and it's just kind of building up our temptation. So Paul says when that pressure is on us there, and then combined with what James says, we get into this opportunity, and the cutting the little corners we think is no big deal. Be careful when you think you're standing firm. It's just a little thing. I'm still firm. I'm still standing here solidly. Let me help you see it this way. I want to look at this verse 13 with you out of the Amplified Bible. And the verse will sound a lot longer than what we just read because they're going to amplify some of the words and give us the fuller definition. But there's some phrases that I want to pull out of this. So let's look carefully at this one. Here's the first part of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 out of the Amplified Bible. It says this: "For no temptation, no trial regarding as enticing to sin, no matter how it comes or where it leads, has overtaken you and laid hold on you that is not common to man." That is, no temptation or trial has come to you that is beyond human resistance and that is not adjusted and adapted and belonging to human experience and such as man can bear. I want you to look at that line right near the end there. This temptation that is not adjusted and adapted. See, here's the thing: when God does not tempt us beyond what we can bear, because the pressure that he might bring to our life, the heat that he might bring to our life, is adjusted and adapted specifically for you and for me. He knows how to adapt it just right for where you are or where I am. Now, this verse says that all of these temptations are common to man. You're never going to experience something that you can say, nobody in the world has ever gone through what I'm going through. Okay? Your experience is going to be common. Everybody's going to experience this. But God can adjust it and adapt it uniquely for you and for me, and be able to equip us uniquely to be able to be successful in going through that. Or I like what C.S. Lewis reminded us. He said this: "God, who foresaw your tribulation, has specially armed you to go through it, not without pain, but without stain." Yeah, it's going to be painful, but you're going to be able to get through it successfully. You're not going to have that stain on your record. You're not going to have that mark because God has prepared you. He's adjusted and adapted it perfectly. Now, let me show you the second part of that same verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13 out of the Amplified Bible, because there's another phrase we need to pull out of here. So look at the second part of this verse. "But God is faithful to his word and his compassionate nature. And he can be trusted not to let you be tempted and tried and assayed beyond your ability and strength of resistance and power to endure." Now look at that phrase, tempted and tried and assayed. Now that word that is there for tempted really carries with it the implication of an assayer who is trying something. Now, what's an assayer? An assayer is somebody who looks at a precious metal and determines its purity based on the amount of impurities that are there. So the assayer will look at that silver ore or that gold nugget and say, this is the value because of what I can see as far as the purity or the impurities that are in there. And so this verse reminds us that God is testing and trying and assaying. He wants to see exactly what's there. He wants us to see what's there so that we know what has to be removed from our lives. I've used this example before, but it's a good one to remind us of. Silversmiths, when they are wanting to bring the impurities out of silver, they'll put it in the crucible, and then they put the crucible into the furnace. But then they don't just walk away. They watch that silver ore very carefully because they'll see the impurities, the dross, begin to bubble to the top. And then they'll take it out of the furnace and they'll scrape those impurities off and look at the silver and then put it back into the furnace. And they'll watch carefully, pull it back out, scrape off the impurities, look into the silver, and then put it back into the furnace again. What are they looking for? The silversmith is looking into the silver. He knows that it's pure when he sees his own reflection coming back to him. And it's the same thing with what God does for us. So all of our temptations are adjusted and adapted perfectly for us. He is putting us in with the right temperature and the right time to purify, to take off the impurities, the dross out of our life. And he's looking at our lives to see his reflection coming back to him. Let's go back to James, where James was talking about temptations. Here's what James says earlier in that, just a few verses earlier than what we read. He said, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." That we go through these trials and we should count them as a joyful time, because what's happening during this time, during the pressure, during the heat, is the impurities are being revealed. Trust me. The bad stuff in your life, the ugly stuff in your life will get squeezed out of you when you're under pressure. When the heat is on, that's when those things are going to begin to bubble to the surface. And God does that. He's adjusted it and adapted it perfectly. He's watching perfectly so that we can be aware of those things and scrape them off. He wants those things to be removed from our lives. So now let's go back to the second part of this verse. I want to wrap it up. So one more phrase I want you to see here. So let's pick it up, that you'll not be tested and tried and assayed beyond your ability and strength of resistance and power to endure. But with the temptation, he will always also provide the way out, the means of escape to a landing place, that you may be capable and strong and powerful to bear up under it patiently. Look at that phrase. You may be capable and strong and powerful to bear up under it patiently. Listen, God doesn't want to set you up for failure. He wants to set you up for success. So in James, where he says, consider it pure joy when you're going through these trials, because it's revealing the impurities and you can remove them. And you say, well, I see the impurities, but I don't know how to remove them. Well, the very next verse, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. God doesn't give you wisdom like he feels like he's under obligation to do it, or he's going, again, I got to do this. He will not find fault. But whenever you say, I don't know how to handle this, I don't have the wisdom to be able to do this, God says, I'll give it to you if you ask. And then ultimately, God wants us to be successful, because then here's what James says is the conclusion of going through these trials. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, when he has gone through that heat and had the impurities removed, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. Interesting. Okay, so it's all a part of this purifying process. Now, let's go back to 1 Corinthians 10, and I want you to see, okay, so verse number 12, we said that word so is a therefore. So therefore, beware, you don't want to get overconfident and think you can handle everything here, because that's when you're setting yourself up. And then he says that the temptations are not going to overwhelm you. Okay, why? God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Notice that God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But how many of my pressures in my life are there because I put them there, not because God put them there? So we read this out of the Amplified Bible, that God knows how to adjust and adapt perfectly. He's watching like that silversmith. He knows just the time and the temperature to watch and remove. He'll give us wisdom to help us remove those impurities from our life. But how many times do we do it? See, listen to this conclusion now that Paul says in verse number 14, therefore, my dear friends, therefore, so here's the conclusion of this, flee from idolatry. Now, that word flee is the same word that's translated shun that we looked at last week in this series, is that in the Bible. And that word, we saw that in the Greek, it means for us to take hold of ourselves. and make sure that we're holding ourselves back from going into a position where we're going to be set up for failure, where we're going to be pulled down. God doesn't want to do that. He never sets us up for failure. He sets us up for success. But notice what he says, flee from idolatry. What is idolatry? Idolatry is putting something else in the place of God, like putting my own agenda in the place of God's agenda, saying this is what I'm going to do today. This is how I'm going to handle things. This is what I have decided is best for me. Those things are all idols because it's making the idol of our mind, of our will, of our desires, of our feelings more important than God. So listen, friends, let me ask you something. When you are overwhelmed, would you just pause and reflect on a couple of things? I want to give you some questions that I think would be very wise for you to ask yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling this pressure, and you start, well, God won't give me more than I can handle. Well, God won't give you temptation. He won't put you in a testing time more than you can handle. But you need to ask yourself, have I put myself in a vulnerable place? So maybe the first question you need to ask yourself is, am I getting enough sleep? Or is it my entertainment habits that's keeping me up too late at night and I'm not getting the proper sleep that I need to get? Let me ask you another question to consider. Are you eating right? I know for me, when I get hungry, I get angry. You've heard that word, hangry. My patience gets short. So how's your diet? But you know what? Your diet can kind of come back and get you the other way. You can eat so much that the overload of sugar in your body can cause problems, and you're not thinking straightly. So think about your sleep patterns. Think about your diet. What about the priority of Bible study and prayer? Are you making that a priority? Are you going to God's word and saying, I need to read this and see what wisdom that he has for me? I need to pray about these things and say, maybe, God, here's my to-do list that I'd like to do today, but is this what you want me to do today? Do you have something else in mind for me besides this? I think another question for you to ask is about relationships. Do I have some relationships in my life that are draining me? Now, listen, one of the things that's going to drain you faster than almost anything is unforgiveness. When somebody has slighted you or hurt you and you've not let that go and you're carrying around a grudge, I promise you that's going to pull you down, that's going to drain you because you're constantly rehearsing in your mind how they hurt you, how you were right and they were wrong, and how they should be punished and you should get, okay? If you have those kind of relationships, take care of those. Ask forgiveness and make it right. But then let's come back to what James said here. Let me ask you this question. Have you asked God for wisdom? Or are you trying to figure it out on your own? If you're trying to figure it out on your own, that's making an idol of your own mind. So don't do that. Say, God, I don't understand. I don't know how to handle this. I need your wisdom to be able to handle this. I think then you have to also confess your shortcomings. So that's the question I would ask you to ask yourself. Have I confessed those shortcomings? Have I admitted, or am I like Paul where I said, I'm standing firm. I'm good. There's nothing wrong with me. Well, there is something wrong with me. I'm struggling here. Have I confessed that? That's going to be your first key to then being able to say, I need to ask God for wisdom. And finally, I would ask you this one. Have you obeyed what God has already spoken to you? When God pointed something out to you about maybe unforgiveness or getting better sleep or changing your diet or spending more time reading the Bible and praying, have you done those things? Because if God has given you a word, an instruction that you haven't obeyed yet, he's not going to give you something else. That would be setting you up for failure. He's going to say, you need to obey what I've already spoken to your heart, and then I will give you the next step. I've already laid on your heart what the first step is. You have to take that first step before I'm going to reveal to you the second step. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. God's temptations are perfectly balanced, adjusted and adapted for you to reveal the impurities in your life so that he can refine those and bring you to a place of strength. And as James says, then he's going to give you this crown of righteousness. So my response has to be, therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry. What am I putting up in place of God? As I was pondering that this week, I just kind of had this conclusion that that God laid on my heart, and I jotted it down. And it says this: God will never overwhelm me or set me up for failure, but I may overwhelm myself and set myself up for failure if I'm not being careful. If I'm not saying, I think that I'm standing firm, and maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to take a look around. Maybe I need to ask the Holy Spirit to search me. Maybe I need to go through those questions and say, why am I feeling overwhelmed? Is it because I'm tired, or my diet's off, or I'm not exercising, or I'm not reading my Bible, or I have unforgiveness in my life? I'm not asking God for help. I'm not confessing where I'm falling short. I'm not obeying what God has spoken to me. Those are all things that will set myself up for failure. Will God give you more than you can handle? Not when it comes to the tests that you're going to go through, that he wants you to get an A+, that he wants you to excel at. He'll never give you a test that's beyond what you can help. But, friends, sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We pile the stuff on ourselves. But even there, our gracious God would come in, and he says this: cast all those burdens on me, because I care for you. You're going to have to take off those things that are weighing you down and causing you to feel overwhelmed, and give it to him. And then you'll realize he can carry them better than you can, and he's going to adjust and adapt everything perfectly for you. I'd love to dialogue with you more. You can leave a comment below. If you have some other thoughts of phrases that you'd like us to explore in this series, isn't that in the Bible? You can leave that as a comment below. I'm praying for you, friends. I believe that God wants you to be successful, and he wants you to overcome, and he's going to help you with those things if you will go to him and ask him to give you the wisdom to be successful in those. God bless you, friends. I love you.